this episode of Freedom Hub's Working Group. I'm your host, Jeff Cantor, along with my co-host, Charles Froman. You'll definitely want to visit us on the web at your-mp.com, and we are the Freedom Hub, which is the disruptor's intersection for sure. We also have an alternate show, so we just want to kind of plug that for a quick minute, but it's about the same idea of free market ideas, but pertinent to medical care, which is a very personal situation. And again, you definitely want to visit the website. We've come up with a nice, easy to remember web address. Let's take a quick gander at it as we shift into finding out about today. When you come over here, you're going to see some great drop downs. There's the tab under home about the webinars, which is today, and then continuing the conversation, which is a very important one. So let's divert to that for a minute. Here's what happens after today. This is your chance to connect with the people that we just had on and allow you to kind of get further engaged with them, help them out, participate, blog, lobby, whatever is kind of like their bailiwick, you can become a participant in it. Also, under the Freedom tab, we've got Fighting for Freedom, and this is another key one because we want to be abreast of everything that's happening. So here's all the key issues that are rolling out right now you want to be aware of. Here's a lot of different organizations we keep adding to that are trying to help support the idea of freedom. And so you definitely want to come back and take a good look through here. But let's kind of steer into today. So under the home, if you click on webinars, you end up on this tab here, a little intro at the beginning about it. Breakout in the 2 webinars for today. A little further down are the links to who's coming up. And then very importantly, down here is the links to the videos that get archived. So after today, or by the weekend, I should say, these will be up. And this is just showing you a tale of what's been up there in the past. And so you'll see goes back and back quite a bit. There's an awful lot in here to sift through. I would tell you they're all really quite good. So whatever strikes your fancy, check it out. And then if you're inclined, continue that conversation. So, but on that note, let's talk about today. So here's where Charles is going to take over. Why don't you do the intro for us?
Yep, Jeff and Murray, welcome back. For anyone who's a regular, we know that Professor Sabrin spoke Why the Fed Sucks. And I say that third word because that was the title of his book. And certainly he'll talk about that because today's topic around Trump and Hoover should have something to do with monetary policy and Fed-based debauchement of our money and credit. He has been a finance professor in New Jersey at a place called Ramapo College for a long time. In fact, he's retired, but not before. He had a center named after himself, the Sabrin Center for Free Enterprise. He has also dipped his toe in the political arena as a candidate for both New Jersey Senate and governor in both the LP and the Republican Party. And for sure, he'll have some things to say about that, especially as close as he is to the center of financial power there in New York. I'm sure running for office in New Jersey is a bit different than running for office in some states farther away from those power centers. So the topic today really is cool because, a lot of us, mainly including libertarians, got sucked up into the Trump phenomenon as sort of a middle finger against the establishment. But, those who maintain their principles a bit more said, hold on, maintain your neutral response to what's going on. He really hasn't done all that much libertarian-wise. And if you look at it from 30,000 feet, you could see the equation Dr. Sabrin is making here between Trump and Hoover. Because, what is Hoover? Hoover is this big government Republican from the early part of the last century, involved in so much of what the government did in a big way, price controls and wartime rationing for Wilson, and he got his turn as president at the end of the Roaring '20s, and the economic floor just took out the floor from under him. He suffered from a calamity in some ways beyond his control, but he apparently tried a lot of big government policies to try and stem that collapse. So why should a libertarian care about Hoover? A lot of conservatives think he got a raw deal. And similarly, Trump sort of suffered from a calamity, the pandemic, beyond his control in certain ways, but he did respond with a lot of big government responses to that. So why should a libertarian give Trump a pass for what happened to him? He's gone, and like Hoover, might he be considered by history as, a sort of a pathetic figure who scrambled and lashed out in any way to avoid his demise? We'll see. Let's hear what Murray has to say, Jeff.
Well, thank you guys for inviting me back. I'm here in Florida. That's not Florida. That's the San Francisco Bay Bridge. We're in Sanibel right now, staying with my sister-in-law, and just want to let everyone know we became Florida residents this week, and we'll be moving here permanently in June in order to enjoy the sunshine, the freedom that the people of Florida have relative to the rest of the country, and continue writing some books in the future. Anyway, I'd like to begin by giving us a brief autopsy of the Trump administration, because I think it's important to realize how Trump really missed an opportunity in his first few days in office, actually before he even got inaugurated on January 20th, 2017, to undercut the Democrats' continuing harping on the Russian collusion and Trump. And so what Trump should have done, and I don't think he was smart enough and he didn't have the people around him to advise him to do this, is he should have thrown down the gauntlet to the Democrats and the media saying, okay, you believe I colluded with Russia during the campaign. You have not presented any evidence. And here's my offer to the American people. I'm going to appoint an independent commission of Republicans and Democrats from the House and the Senate Judiciary Committees, headed by the distinguished Emeritus Professor of Law at Harvard University, Alan Dershowitz, who's a Democrat and voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016. And I want them to investigate, leave no stone unturned as to what really happened during the 2016 campaign and my relationship, if any, with Russia. Of course, there wasn't, he should have said. And here's my promise to the American people. If this commission uncovers any evidence that I colluded with Russia, I will resign upon their presentation of the evidence. And if there's no collusion, if they concluded there's no collusion, then Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and all the Democrats who've been alleging that I've colluded with Russia should resign their positions immediately. This way, he would have thrown down the gauntlet. He would have put them on the defensive, and they probably would have recoiled from that offer by Trump. And so he missed a golden opportunity. I guess that's why we have the Golden Gate Bridge in back of me. This would have been Trump's finest moment to say, let's investigate this right from the get-go. Let's do it in 6 months so we can focus on the people's business, which is getting the economy in order, ending these endless wars, and deregulating the economy so we can allow entrepreneurship to flourish in America. If he would have done that in the first 6 months, I think he would have won easily despite the pandemic in 2020, and despite what people allege, the allegations of fraud in the key states that he lost that turned the election over to Biden. So that's my brief autopsy of the Trump administration, that he really missed a way to undermine the Democrats and the media. That's the other thing. The media credibility would have fallen dramatically, swiftly, if after 6 months, this commission would have reported that there was no collusion. And so even though the Mueller report didn't have any evidence, this commission, I think, would have been a great opportunity for, in full transparency. In other words, this should have been like the Watergate hearings of the 1973 and 74, I think 74, where everything was in the open, where witnesses were called under oath to testify what they knew, when they knew it, and so on. And this would have been, I think, the opportunity for the Republicans with Trump to not lose any seats in 2018 and win in 2020. So having said that, why is Trump the Herbert Hoover of the 21st century? Well, let's go back and remember what happened to Hoover. The stock market peaked in September 1929. It crashed in October 1929, and then didn't bottom out till 1932 when it fell nearly 90%. And we had 25% unemployment in 1932. the economy began to recover, even though Hoover did everything wrong. He basically was a Keynesian president before Keynes became popular with the publication of his magnum opus in 1936, The General Theory. So Hoover was intervening, trying to prop up wages when prices were falling. And so companies were losing money hand over fist, and the unemployment rate skyrocketed. By keeping wages up when prices were falling, companies were losing money, and the stock market reflected that with a drop of nearly 90%. And so Hoover misjudged or didn't understand as an engineer what the economy was all about, thinking that wages, high wages, are the cause of American prosperity when they are the result of American prosperity. He really didn't understand how an economy works. As an engineer businessman, he should have known better. But nevertheless, what did Roosevelt do? He ran on a fiscally conservative platform, calling Hoover a big spender, saying we have to balance the budget, make sure the gold standard is strong. And what did he do when he got into office? He did just what Hoover did. He continued Hoover's policies. And so later on during the 1930s, Roosevelt's people admitted that what they did in the FDR administration was follow Hoover's blueprint. And of course, the Depression lasted a full decade and really didn't end until we got into World War II, because we still had, I think, 19% unemployment in 1940 when World War II was underway in Europe. And we didn't get in, obviously, till Pearl Harbor was attacked in December 1941. But the point I want to make about Hoover and Trump, and this is, I think, one of the points that very few people have made, is that Hoover became the whipping boy for the Democrats from then on in. That the Democrats ran successfully until 1952 when Eisenhower won, in saying that we can't go back to Hoover's policies, when in fact FDR and Truman just expanded the New Deal policies of Hoover, with big government, easy money, regulations, protectionist trade policies. A total disaster for not only the U.S. economy, but the global economy. In fact, Cordell Hull, who was FDR's Secretary of State, in his memoirs wrote that he believed that the trade wars of the 1930s was one of the major contributing factors to World War II. So here you have an insider explaining that trade wars do not work. And ironically, it was Trump who said in his trade war with China, he said, it's easy to win trade wars, which is a bonehead statement by Trump. Anyway, so you have the Democrats running against Hoover, and they kept on running against him for quite a long time, until I guess the 1960s. And Hoover died in 1964, I think, at the age of 94. And so he lived a long life. And so the Democrats ran successfully against him. Now, there's another point I want to make about this and how Trump will become the Hoover of the 21st century. One of the reasons we're in the mess that we're in today, politically and socially and culturally, is because of the Republicans not pushing back on the New Deal. When Eisenhower was elected in 1952, he didn't cut any New Deal programs. In fact, he added a new cabinet department called Health, Education, Welfare, HEW, which now is SSHS. So Eisenhower had the opportunity to say to the American people, well, we tried the New Deal. It gave us huge deficits. It really didn't spur economic growth. What we need to do is go back to the fiscal policies of balanced budgets, of low taxes, which of course didn't happen. The marginal tax rate was still, I think, 90%. That was the highest tax rate, but very few people paid that because there were a lot of exemptions and deductions during the 1950s. But Eisenhower had an opportunity to say, we need to go back to sound fiscal policies, sound economic policies, expand the free enterprise system, get rid of unnecessary regulation, and that would have undercut the New Deal. And so when Kennedy got elected in 1960 and tried to give us the new frontier by expanding a little bit on the New Deal policies, he didn't get much through until Johnson got elected in 64 and gave us the Great Society in 65. And we know what happened. Government went on steroids. Johnson, being a protege of FDR, gave us the second New Deal, the Great Society programs. And what happened? We got the welfare warfare state, the Great Society programs, and Vietnam. and Johnson didn't run for re-election in 1968. Herbert Hubert Humphrey, his vice president, barely lost to Nixon. And what did Nixon do? He didn't turn back the Great Society programs. In fact, he added more social welfare spending during his tenure in the White House. And Ford didn't do anything in the short time he was president. And so then you get Carter getting elected, and we get the double-digit inflation, the second bout in the 1970s. And then Reagan gets elected with the fiscal conservative libertarian mantra, get government off our backs, which is probably the simplest way to articulate a libertarian philosophy. And that's another point I want to make. The Republicans have a habit of running like libertarians and governing like Democrats, because they don't roll back anything of the Democrats do in prior administrations. So Reagan ran on a promise to end the Department of Energy and the Department of Education, and of course none of that came to fruition. One thing he did do is cut marginal tax rates by 1986, but taxes did go up throughout the decade, as Murray Rothbard pointed out in The Myth of Reaganomics, which is available on the Mises.org website. In other words, Reagan was, as he called it, a military Keynesian. A lot of government spending, a lot of deficits. There was some deregulation, which, by the way, began under Carter. Most people don't know that. Carter began the deregulation in late 70s, which really freed up the sectors that had been highly regulated by the federal government. And we got a boom in the 1980s because of that. That's one of the primary reasons we got a boom. Plus the inflation was slain temporarily by Volcker, who really put screws on the money supply. We know interest rates skyrocketed and the money supply shrunk for a brief period of time. Then they put the pedal to the metal, and we got the great stock market boom of the 80s that ended in the crash of 87. And so what we have then is Reagan left office, Bush becomes president, and he too promises no new taxes. Regulation goes up under Bush. Clinton's elected, and then he raises taxes. The Republicans take over the House in 1994, and they put a check on Bill Clinton's attempt to increase spending. Fast forward to 2000, you get Bush elected, Bush II elected. And what does he do? He expands the welfare state and gets us involved in Iraq. So he gives us the welfare warfare state. So the Republicans are no different than the Democrats, and we get the Patriot Act as well. And so that leads us to the Obama administration, which again gives us Obamacare, the beginning of socialized medicine in the United States. And we get 2016, and Trump comes in as the proverbial outsider with no establishment support, and he beats Hillary Clinton handily. And watching election night 2016, watching Trump's body language when he comes on the stage after it's announced that he won the election, he was not prepared to win. He thought he was going to lose. Hillary Clinton was already ordering to redecorate the White House. She didn't even appear election night to congratulate Trump or concede. She was just really flustered by what happened. And so Trump is elected. And what does he do? He has a huge fight with the Democrats, as I pointed out earlier. And instead of undercutting the Democrats, he engages in a name calling, tit for tat with the Democrats in the media. And his agenda is really just cutting taxes, which is good, but he didn't cut spending. Spending went up during the Trump administration. And tax rates went down, which helped a good portion of the population. And so then the pandemic hits in early 2020. And so what do we make of this pandemic? Everything I've read so far about this pandemic is that the government reaction was overreaching in terms of quote, protecting us from this virus from China. There are people who've been writing about the pandemic saying it's not a pandemic, it's just a very bad flu, or as Bill Sardi has been writing on LouRockwell.com, it is a vitamin B1 deficiency, because the symptoms of COVID are very similar to the symptoms of a vitamin B1 deficiency. So you have people who are challenging the conventional narrative about the pandemic, what people should do to prevent the horrible conditions of the pandemic. And I know people who had COVID and they had fairly mild symptoms. I know one individual who had very severe symptoms. He was intubated for a month or two, and he was in terrible shape. And that's the only person I know personally that was horribly affected by the pandemic. But everyone else, all different ages, all different backgrounds. In fact, two doctors I know had COVID, and they treated themselves with the Z-Pack. And I think they may have used hydroxychloroquine as well. And now there's evidence that ivermectin can treat it successfully as well. So the sad reality is that the American people have not been given different perspectives on a medical issue. And as an individual, if you don't feel right and you're being treated by a physician, it's really incumbent upon you to get a second or even a third opinion, which people should be doing if they feel that they're not getting good medical advice from their either primary physician or a specialist that they're going to. So why the American people are genuflecting and hanging on every word of Dr. Fauci and the CDC is beyond me, since we don't rely on the CDC for our medical advice. We rely on our own home internist or family physician for medical care. And so the American people have basically outsourced their medical care to the federal government, which is the beginning of, I think, another chapter on the road to socialized medicine. What we're seeing now, and the government's response to it with this so-called vaccine, is the government is now in charge of medicine for the American people with the vaccine, or actually it's gene therapy, according to some analysts and some physicians. So the American people are now dependent upon the federal government for their medical care, which I think is a horrible situation, since as free and independent people, we should be getting information on our own and dealing with these issues with our family and our own medical team that we use, whether it's individual internist or specialist for our needs. And we know what the data show: people who are getting ill have underlying conditions, are typically diabetic, are typically overweight, are elderly, living in nursing homes. That's not the average American person. Now, obesity is a big problem in America, and some underlying conditions are. But if you're relatively young and healthy, you shouldn't worry too much about this illness. So having said that, Trump mishandled this by allowing the Fauci and others to get out in front, and Trump got out in front and made statements that were ridiculed by the press. He should have said, let's put together a forum of doctors, specialists, world-renowned specialists in epidemiology and viruses, and let's have an open forum so we can have different perspectives and people can decide for themselves what they should be doing to prevent COVID and to treat it successfully. And if he did that, that would have been a great opportunity for him to show, I don't know epidemiology, I don't know viruses. These are the government doctors, but there are other doctors out there who have different perspectives. So let's put everyone together. Let's televise it on C-SPAN and other outlets and let the people decide with their physicians what to do. So having said that, what Trump did was made him the whipping boy for the Democrats, the independents, the media. And I can tell you, having lived through this in New Jersey, people were beside themselves about Trump and what he was saying about this. And rather than relying on other voices, he got out in front. And that was, I think, a huge mistake. And then he announced the national lockdown in March, which he shouldn't have done. He should have left it up to the individual states. He should have said, I'm a proponent of federalism. We don't have a one-size-fits-all situation in terms of protocols for this situation. Let's let the governors take the lead on this with their health departments and leave it at that. So he missed huge opportunities to deflect what he became the target for the problems of the pandemic. I've been on threads with former neighbors and people saying Trump is criminally negligent for the deaths of 500,000 people in America, which is preposterous. When Eisenhower was president in the 1957-58 pandemic, 117,000 Americans died. There was no mask mandates. There were no lockdowns. No one accused Eisenhower of being criminally negligent when over 100,000 Americans died in the late 1950s. So we're people coming up with the notion that Trump is criminally negligent for the deaths of people. Now, there are other people claim people who are dying with COVID are being listed as COVID deaths instead of being listed as an underlying condition, whether it's someone who's had a stroke or Alzheimer's in a nursing home, and they're listed as a COVID death when they're dying with COVID as opposed to from COVID. So again, everything that I've learned is that this is a very virulent flu, and and we know in the past, tens of thousands of Americans have died from flu. We never had any lockdowns. We never had any mask mandates. We didn't have any other mandates from government. People went about their normal business, and if you got sick, you stayed home. You didn't go to work. You didn't go visiting friends and relatives. You didn't go to large gatherings. And people treated the flu like they treated with every other illness, depending upon what the doctor recommended for the proper protocol for that. And a colleague of mine, early in January of 2020, before all this happened, got sick with pneumonia, and she thinks she may have had COVID, and she got better pretty quickly, but she was out several weeks from the beginning of the semester. So she may have been one of the first Westchester County residents where there was a resident that had COVID that wasn't one of the first residents of one of the first patients of COVID in early 2020. So again, the Democrats will now use Trump as the whipping boy for the next 20, 40, who knows how many decades to make their point, especially after the January 6th, quote, insurrection on Capitol Hill. The Democrats are going to show pictures of Trump, his speech. They're going to show pictures of the so-called insurrection. And then they're going to say, if you want Republicans in control again, this is what we can expect. And that's what they're going to be running for the next, who knows how many election cycles. But the Democrats are overreaching. They are really overreaching. I've taught financial history of the United States, and everything that students and I walked through together in the 20th century and early 21st century regarding monetary policy, fiscal policy, regulatory policy, it's happening right now, literally on steroids. What Biden is doing, and there's a lot of question whether he's in charge or not, because it doesn't seem he's all there cognitively, but he's taking his marching orders from people behind the scenes, whether it's Obama, whether it's Susan Rice, whether it's Valerie Jarrett, Obama's advisors. Biden is not taking any serious questions from the media. His spokespeople are downplaying any issues that he has. And what we're seeing today is literally the end result of 100 years of progressivism, starting with the Wilson administration, with the income tax, the Federal Reserve, and all the other policies that the Democrats have imposed upon us, which the Republicans had an opportunity over the decades to push back, and they didn't. And that's why in 1971, when Nixon did wage price controls, I concluded back then when I had joined the Republican Party that there's really one party in Washington. It's called the Washington Party, made up of two different wings, the Republicans and Democrats. They go back and forth, but nothing changes. Everything stays the same and gets worse and worse and worse. Or as Hayek put in 1944 in the title of his book, we're on the road to serfdom. And I see this happening very clearly, where people are driving in their cars with a mask on by themselves. People are walking in the open air with masks on, with shields on. And this is preposterous. I don't think you can get COVID in the open air. And now the CDC has stated just the other day that you don't have to wear a mask outdoors. Well, people were saying that a year ago. And I think the CDC has done a very bad thing to the American people, not allowing other voices to be heard. And the notion that we have one agency telling us what the quote guidelines are, I think is preposterous. We should be determining for ourselves what is the best protocol by getting information. And now with the internet, you can get information very easily from different sources, and you have to think about it and speak to knowledgeable people like I had when I wrote my book that's coming out shortly, I hope within the next month or so, on how to create a universal free market medical care system. That's the goal of libertarians and free market physicians, how to have universal medical care under a free market system. And I interviewed doctors that you're familiar with, did a lot of research, and it's all laid out there how we can phase out Medicare and Medicaid and rely on nonprofits to deliver medical care to the uninsured, the indigent around the country. And instead of having a one-size-fits-all Medicare, Medicaid system where a lot of people fall through the cracks, and putting people in charge and of their medical care and restoring the doctor-patient relationship. That's, I think, the key point. Right now, the doctors and the patients are totally dependent upon insurance company payouts. We're dependent upon insurance companies for what doctors we can see and not see. Medical care is no different than any other service. We should be allowed to pay for it out of our own pocket or have a catastrophic policy, which is a free market approach to medical issues. So Trump missed an opportunity to reform the medical care system. He took the lead in the pandemic when he shouldn't have. He should have said, let's hear all the voices. And because of all the deaths that occurred, people are blaming him across the spectrum. Even Republicans, some Republicans have blamed him, and independents. And that's where you lose the election at the national level, is with the independents. And they swung sharply for Biden if the results are accurate and not fraudulent. But again, reading the letters to the editor and the op-eds in the local paper, you can see that Trump lost the suburban votes, especially suburban women vote, pretty substantially around the country when he shouldn't have. He should have been the champion of free enterprise, of entrepreneurship, of deregulation, of ending this endless wars, which he should have made a strong point of that in the debates with Biden. And after the first debate, I felt that Trump lost the election because he kept on interrupting Biden. And I'm screaming at him, watching this thing, let Joe speak so people could see what a fumbler he is, what a mumbler he is. Instead, Trump kept on interrupting him, which I think was a bad strategy. And from what we read, Chris Christie was advising him, who told him in prepping for the first debate, don't interrupt Biden. And what does Trump do? He interrupts Biden. So for some reason, Trump does not listen to good advice and did not bring some good people around him in his administration. And you can see what the turnover was with all the cabinet people and his chief of staff. So Trump's administration was, you have to say it was a failure because he didn't get reelected, like Hoover didn't get reelected. Now, Hoover, unfortunately, was there when the unemployment rate reached an incredibly high level, and there was no way that people were going to reelect him, even though Roosevelt ran on a platform that sounded quite fiscally conservative. And Trump, I think, is going to fall in that same category. Two people that were successful business people, but missed out on an opportunity to reinforce the principles of this country, which is free enterprise, limited government, low taxes, a peaceful foreign policy. And instead, the events overtook their presidency, and they didn't recover from what should have been a re-election. Well, Hoover would have been very difficult for re-election, but again, he was responsible for a lot of the problems that the country faced in the last 2 years of his presidency by raising taxes, that's announcing he was going to sign the Smoot-Hawley tariff in 1930, which effectively cut off trade, which plummeted the world economy into a spiral. So a lot of Hoover's problems were of his making, and a lot of Trump's problems were of his making. In fact, I've said on radio shows for the past few years, Trump is his own worst enemy, because if he knew how to deal with the Democrats and the media, I think there's an old saying that it's easier to attract a fly with honey or something to that effect than other ways. So if Trump had, I think, been more, I guess the word is, I don't know what the correct word is. If Trump had been more deliberative, he had been more contemplative of how to react to the media, I think he would have won easily, because who would have thought Joe Biden at age 78, who is in cognitive decline, who basically was in government all his life, never held a private sector job, would win this thing. You could have bet a lot of money that he wouldn't have done so. So without the pandemic, I think Trump would have won easily, but because of the pandemic, he muffed the opportunity to make the case for the American people that he would have been the best candidate he would have been better than Joe Biden over the next few years. And then, of course, the Georgia runoff gave the Democrats virtual control of the Senate by being a 50-50 split, and Kamala Harris as VP being the tiebreaker. And so Trump couldn't even carry the two Republican Georgia senators over the finish line in the January runoff elections. And so you got to say that he really failed miserably in giving the Democrats total control of our government. And now there's court packing is possible. DC statehood is possible. Puerto Rican statehood is possible. So Trump is leaving a legacy that may make the Republican Party a permanent minority party. But if the Democrats overreach, which they are doing, so by next November of 2022, there's a good possibility the Congress could switch back to Republican control. But as they say, predicting is hard, especially about the future. So we'll see exactly what transpires over the next 18 months. And we know inflation is already accelerating, and it's going to get worse given the Fed's irresponsible monetary policy. So where we are today is we're at the New Deal, Great Society, Obamacare, Bidenomics on steroids, and this does not end well. This does not end well if they continue this, and the Democrats keep on control of the presidency and the Congress. So with that, I'll stop, and I'd be love to take questions from you, Jeff and Charles, or any other listeners.
All right, very good. Well, that was so encouraging. So thank you so much for making our afternoon. And here you said, why aren't we doing this later in the day? Because I'm going to need to walk this off for a little while. I can't go to bed right after hearing all of this. So, but like you said, we never know where it's going to go. So it'll be interesting to see if this pendulum starts to swing, because a lot of people are getting upset on the grass level and forget the Republicans on the high end side of things. But let's go for some questions. Everyone raise your hand if you will, and let's kick it off with Charles.
Thanks, Jeff. And Professor Sabrin, fantastic survey through history. And it's nice how you returned to Trump as you raised each issue. And wow, that's convincing. Won't Trump hate it if for years down the road he is Hooverized and used as the whipping boy? That would really, I think, attack him at his weakest point, his pride. That would be tough for him to swallow. But with this overplaying by the Democrats of their hand, and that overplaying worsening and becoming a little creepier with the Great Reset, where big tech and big pharma obviously are exploiting the fear, that might affect the future. I mean, you're right. The problem with the future predicting is the future. And that leads to the question, who's going to run? Is it going to be a Bush a la 2000 when, Ron Paul liked his humble foreign policy? I'm thinking of DeSantis. Or will a la Trump in 2016 when he won as a big middle finger to the establishment, will the overplaying, this continued pissing off of real Americans by this crazy, endless COVID craziness, will that help more of a nationalist, or sort of a, how shall I say it, an American firster, or like a Marjorie Taylor Greene or a Laura Boebert? I don't know who has the kind of national heft to take on a DeSantis at this point. But do you get what I'm getting at? Is will we have the opportunity for a pure person like you're talking about? Let's reverse the New Deal like a DeSantis could. Or do you think the anger will allow for a demagogue to exploit all this anger?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, being in Florida, or I should say moving to Florida in June, I expect to meet my local congressman, who's a New Yorker, and I'm a New Yorker. So I think we have a lot in common. And he's a young man. I saw him on Fox News several times, and he sounds fairly fiscally conservative, and he sounds like someone I can speak to about these issues. And I hope to meet the governor because I think he's made some great points about COVID, and he's brought in experts with different perspectives than Fauci and the CDC. So I'd like to make an impact. I'm writing books. I wrote 2 books in the last 10 months, Universal Medical Care, and then a sort of a handbook for business people on how to survive and thrive when the bubble bursts. And the manuscript was just accepted for publication by a business publisher. So that book should be coming out this summer, and my the Universal Medical Care book should be coming out hopefully in the next month or so. But I think what we have to do as libertarians is do it the Ron Paul route, is say, let's tell the American people the truth. Washington cannot run our lives. We cannot be the policeman of the world. Government that governs best governs least. The free enterprise system has created the greatest wealth in the shortest period of time in the history of the world. Government cannot micromanage the economy. The Federal Reserve sucks. We don't have to say it that way, but of course we can say it that way. And here's why. It increases your cost of living while your wages lag behind, and therefore it's an enemy of the people and gives us these horrible boom bust cycles and these bubbles. That's all we have to say. Deregulation gives people, entrepreneurs, the opportunity to provide goods and services that the people want. That's what deregulation is about, in a cost-effective manner, so we can have better goods and services at lower prices. And we can point to the history of this over the last 30 years. So again, giving them the free market, limited government explanation and vision for the country, I think will work. That our medical care is not the government's responsibility. And that's one of the points I make in this book. Nowhere in the Constitution is the government responsible for medical care. So we have to say it. The government has overreached in medical care and education. That's another area we haven't even discussed. I'm gonna try to write a short monograph in the next few weeks, why we should really sever government from education. I think what we see now is the teachers' unions have really shot themselves, quote, in the foot by forcing schools to be closed, and parents are beside themselves, and students are being hurt immeasurably by not going into the classroom and socializing and learning in the classroom. So I think we can make the case. Education is too important to be left to politicians. That's all we have to say. And we could say there are so many ways of delivering education or providing education for our kids. It's homeschooling, it's community co-ops, and you can hire the best teachers, pay them well, and you could have local education. We could save a ton of money on property taxes and state income taxes, like in New Jersey. The state income tax is totally devoted to public education. And we could free up the economy. That's the mantra we should be saying loud and clear. Freedom works. That's, I think, the Ron Paul mantra. We should be saying it now. We've had an incredible period of time between the 2008 election, Obama, the election of Trump, and now the election of Biden, and say what we've seen now reveals that government cannot solve our problems. We are responsible for ourselves. We should be financially independent. That's another theme we should be talking about. I don't know any child that grows up in America and is being taught that they should be financially dependent, especially on the government. We should be teaching kids to be financially independent. In fact, April is Financial Literacy Month. Financial literacy is probably the most important subject junior high school and high school students should be learning, and even for college students. And you can begin in the elementary years as well, learning what a savings account is, what a checking account is, just basic stuff, and then get into the stock market and other financial instruments and institutions. This is what people have to know about in order to be financially independent. And unfortunately, the schools have done a horrible job in teaching this, and we see this in this speculation that's going on with Bitcoin and so on and so forth. Rather than creating real wealth, we're just engaging in massive speculation because of the easy money policies.
Interesting comment. One thing on the school side of it, if anything, to reinforce your point to a lot of these people out there that are kind of just blindly following along, they've sat in on some of those Zoom calls to see what's being told to their kids. and they haven't been happy in many instances. So that helps too, because you got to get them converted psychologically.
What?
Let's take some other questions. So do raise a hand as you will. I was going to ask you pertinent to with the luxury that you've got as far as like saying, we need to say this is a better way to go philosophically. But the most important thing you said, you kind of said it so quickly, is, and here's the reason why. Because neither
Mhm.
the Democrats or Republicans ever seem to have the reason why. It's all name
Yeah.
calling, or my idea is
Yep.
smarter than yours, or whatever. And maybe so, but it never goes past that level where anyone can buy into the premise. And so if you force them to have to explain what they mean, you can show them for the fallacies that they are. Charles, I
And
see. Go ahead. Add the comment. Then I'm gonna
no,
take.
I think one thing we have to do is just people's experiences. The big box stores. I mean, some people don't like them. Some people love them. Amazon, people love it. Some people hate it. But say, here's a way we get our goods that we want in a timely manner at an affordable price, whether it's Costco, whether it's Walmart, whether it's Amazon, whether it's other big box stores. And of course, your local retailers, your Main Street retailers also provide a valuable service for you. So we can show that the free enterprise economy delivers the goods that people want, and the government taxes us and we get very little for it. I think that's what we have to show. Compare and contrast government with the free enterprise, the market economy. And I think it's a hands down, it's a winner.
And the other thing typically is the government in the end settles for the lowest bidder.
Yeah.
So
Oh
if I'm
yeah.
gonna if I'm gonna get you like some phone, I'm the cell phone guy now. What are they getting you? The top of the line phone, or are you gonna get the bottom of the line? So
Well, I think a
that
good
too.
example of this, great example of this is computers. When I got my first computer more than 30 years ago, I paid a lot of money for very little storage and speed. Now it's a lower price, and it's an infinite better in terms of speed, quality, you name it. I mean, these are things you have to point to real examples. I think that the best way to inform people or try to win them over to our side is to point out the examples of why the market economy is better than the government quote economy.
Very good. Charles, I see your hand popping up.
Yes, as an economist, Murray, and as someone who has adroitly, surveilled some of the bad trends with the COVID hysteria, paint us not a good picture of American business, but a bad picture of government and what awaits us. Some people say the American people need a pain point to get them to care. So with the Fed inflation, how bad could that get? Your book
Mm.
coming out, surviving the bubble. How bad could the vaccine passports make things with unvaccinated folks not being able to work or shop? Or what is going on with the tracking via these passports from big tech and the technocracy? Paint us sort of a dark vision, if that's what's needed to motivate folks to care.
Well, I think we're starting to see the pushback. We're starting to see price inflation, and of course, gasoline prices are up $1 a gallon since what 2 months ago, 3 months ago. People were paying under $3. Now they're paying well over $3. So that's remember, gas prices are probably the most sensitive price we have in our economy because people see it every day. They fill up their gas tank. And of course, what's happened is that a lot of people aren't going to work anymore. They're working at home. So that's easy pain for a lot of people. Um, so to get back to the original point is that people have to feel pain. Unfortunately, in the previous years, previous episodes, people have looked to the government to solve their problems rather than saying government doesn't work. So we have to keep on harping on this notion that government got us here, is giving us the pain. So and the solution is not more government, is what Reagan said: get government off our back. So we have to employ pithy statements, but give them enough evidence to demonstrate why the solution is not looking to Washington or even your state capital, but looking to yourself, your family, your neighbors, your community, and get back to the way of looking at the world from the micro point of view rather than the Keynesian macro point of view, that everything good is going to come down from the government, which is the real trickle down economics. Everything money flowing from Washington, these stimulus checks, these so-called stimulus checks, is nothing more than trickle down economics. The government spends money, and we're supposed to spend it in order to boost the demand in the economy, which doesn't work. These are short-term approaches to sustainable economic activity, and I've given some thought about it. We should look at companies that are sustainable, that have been around 50, 100 years. Why they've been around? Because they provide value to the public. And that's the term that we should use. The government doesn't provide value to the public, because if they did, they wouldn't complain about taxes. And companies provide value because we're voluntarily paying for their goods and services that we think are going to make our life better. So we have to point out that government doesn't provide value. The market economy, businesses do, small, medium, and large business. And if they don't, they go under. Look what's happened to J.C. Penney, Sears, and other companies that are going under, that have gone under. They haven't been able to meet consumer demand, and that they're going by the wayside. So again, in my new book, the second one on Survive and Thrive, I discuss very briefly all the companies that have gone under the last 10 years because they haven't met consumer needs. So it's, again, very simple to understand for the average person, especially if you're a business owner, or you work for a small business. You know, if the customer isn't satisfied, the business is going to suffer. So you have to satisfy consumers for the business to thrive. So I'm a half glass full guy. I think we should be optimistic about the future because there are a lot of good things happening in the economy. The bad things is what government is imposing upon us, and we just have to point out how counterproductive they are, as far as our well-being goes. I think if we do that in a very matter-of-fact way without engaging in rhetoric or anything like that, I think we'll be successful in convincing enough people that what we have today is unsustainable and not in the best interest of the average family, business owner.
That's a very good point. I'm going to slip in one last question because we're fast running out of time, but what would be the elevator pitch explanation to the person that's saying, yeah, we got to get to that $15 wage and somehow if we raise tax on corporations, those dirty, nasty, how that's not going to come back to them somehow in the price of the product itself.
That's a toughie because it takes quite a while to explain this, saying, listen, if government had the answers, had the solutions, we wouldn't have these problems today because they've had 100 years of imposing their will on the American economy and the American people, and we don't have utopia yet with all the trillions of dollars they spent and wasted on all these programs and endless wars. I think that's the brief pitch you can give them, that government is not their friend. It's run by people who are looking to government as a lifelong career, as opposed to something that should be short-term, and people should be left alone to seek their own road in life. And that's the advice I can give to people. If we had more time, I can give you that half-hour, 45-minute address as to why the government is so counterproductive throughout our history, and that we need to depend upon ourselves and our social network, immediate social network, economic network, to have a meaningful life. And I think that's the key, is why some people succumb to not having a meaningful life, because they don't know what their purpose in life is. And if you don't find that out early on in life, you're really going to be, I think, fairly miserable throughout your life. And I think that's one of the keys to having a fulfilled life. And I can say this as someone who's in my 8th decade of life.
Oh, that's very good. And I think that's a very succinct description of what the difference is and why the government's not working. Because, then you can expound upon it. But that was great. And a perfect place for us to end today, because we're right at the right time here. So I would definitely want to thank you for coming and wish you good luck on your new career as a Florida resident.
Well, I look at it as a sort of a reprieve from the cold winters and the extraordinary taxes in Washington, in New Jersey.
Yeah, and you never know what new hobbies will take up, like parasailing or something. So.
No, I think I'll keep my feet to the ground.
So thanks again for today.
Thanks, Jeff and Charles. Appreciate it. Look forward to another session sometime.